March 17th, 1963, 7:23 in the morning, Harlem. For 16 days straight, somebody has been slipping arsenic into Bumpy Johnson's morning coffee. For 16 days straight, he's finished every cup. This morning, the man who's been feeding him for 8 years pours one more pot, $15,000 on the table, a daughter's surgery on the line. A kitchen that used to be a safe place turned into a crime scene. Bumpy takes a slow sip, looks at his cook, and simply says, "This afternoon, Sylvia's. Bring the whole pot." To understand why a man like Bumpy Johnson could sit there and drink from a poisoned pot for 16 straight days, you have to understand where he ruled and what kind of kingdom it really was. Harlem. Early 1960s. He didn't own skyscrapers. He didn't have his name on a single building. What he had was deeper. The policy banks that ran the numbers game, they answered to him. The after-hours joints on Lenox Avenue, they paid tribute. The barber shops, the funeral homes, the little restaurants with 12 tables in a line out the door, they all operated under his blessing, his protection, his rules. Bumpy was 58 years old, and 4 decades into building an empire you couldn't see on a map. No corporate logo, no stock ticker, just people, favors, debts. His brownstone on 127th Street was the nerve center. The kitchen was the heart. Every morning started in that kitchen. Every deal, every funeral, every quiet favor owed, somehow, some way, found its way back to that brownstone. From the outside, it looked simple. People said, "Bumpy's got soldiers on every corner." They were wrong. He didn't have soldiers. He had witnesses. Every corner boy counting slips. Every waitress refilling cups at 3 in the morning. Every shoeshine man kneeling at the curb. They all carried pieces of the puzzle. A whispered name here, a license plate there. A man asking the wrong question in the wrong store. In most cities, those pieces get lost. In Harlem, they went one place, up the street, into that brownstone, onto Bumpy's desk. That was his armor, not bulletproof glass, not a bigger gun. A network, a web of human beings who owed him rent, respect, or their mother's hospital bill. If you want a modern version of that, think about what data is today. The companies that know what you click, who you follow, what you buy at midnight. They don't need to shout. They don't need to threaten. They just need to know. Bumpy was doing that without Wi-Fi. No servers. No algorithms. Just the same basic principle. When information flows toward you, danger has a hard time reaching you by surprise. So when a tired cook in a quiet pharmacy started asking careful questions about arsenic for rats, that wasn't just a sale that almost happened. That was a signal flare, because in Harlem, every counter had ears, every whisper belonged to someone, and sooner or later, almost everything floated back to the man drinking his coffee on 127th Street. Before Rosie ever poured poison into a coffee pot, he was just a cook trying to outrun 2 bad endings. He started in the South. Hot kitchens, long hours, other men's names on the front door. His hands learned the language of knives and pans. One job ended with a death he couldn't control. Another ended with an accusation he couldn't wash off. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color. When rumors stick, resumes don't matter. So he went north. 1 suitcase. 1 daughter, 9 years old. Lucille. Heart working offbeat from the day she was born. A little girl who ran like she was underwater, who tired faster than the other kids, but smiled like she didn't know what defect meant. Harlem took them in, but Harlem wasn't soft. Ma Johnson watched him crack eggs, flip an omelet, clean as he cooked. No wasted motion, no attitude, just quiet skill. She hired him that same afternoon. By the end of the first year, Rosie had become one of those people houses are built around. There before dawn, coffee already brewing by the time Bumpy's feet hit the floor. Still there at midnight, a plate in the oven on low, In case business ran late, he learned the rhythms of the brownstone, when to speak, when to disappear, when to leave a slice of pie on the counter and pretend it was an accident. 3 years in, Bumpy watched him one night in the kitchen. "You never ask questions," Bumpy said. "Not my place, Mr. Johnson. Most people hear things in this house. They get curious." Rosie kept drying the same dish. "Curiosity is for people who don't know why they're here," he said. "I know why I'm here." Bumpy stared at him for a long beat. No smile, no praise. Just a small nod and the soft thump of his footsteps leaving the room. The next morning, Rosie's pay went up 40%. No explanation. None needed. He had passed an exam he didn't know he was taking. 8 years. Same kitchen. Same coffee. Same man at the head of the table. It looked like stability. Until Lucille turned 17. Her heart, the one that had limped through childhood, started to give out. The neighborhood doctors did what they could. It wasn't enough. At Johns Hopkins, the specialists had an answer. Surgery. ICU. Months of follow-up. $12,000 for the operation. $3,000 more for recovery. $15,000 in total. Rosie counted what he had. 8 years of stuffing bills into a tin can under his mattress. Just over $2,000. That wasn't a future. That was a clock ticking toward a funeral. One winter evening, on 135th Street, he stepped out of a pharmacy with her medicine in a paper bag, cold air in his lungs, worry in his bones. A black Cadillac rolled up to the curb like it had his name on it. Door opens. Man steps out. Mid-40s. Sharkskin suit. Gold ring that catches the streetlight. Hair slicked back with confidence. "You don't know me," the man says. "But I know you." He calls him Mr. Clement. Says Lucille like he's an uncle. Recites her age, her diagnosis, the hospital, the exact bill. Then he recites Rosie's reality. 2,000 saved, 13,000 missing. "That's not a savings account," the man tells him. "That's a countdown." An envelope appears, thick, heavy, $5,000 now. 10,000 when the job is done. The job has one target and one method. Bumpy Johnson, arsenic, drip by drip, 2 weeks in the coffee he drinks every morning without fail. Rosie hears his own voice ask the question his conscience should have stopped. How would it work? Here's the cruel part of this story. When you mix desperation with a deadline, people don't always act according to the morals they swear they live by. You squeeze a parent between watch your child fade and cross a line you swore you'd never touch. And the noble answers from books, from pulpits, from dinner table debates start to sound very far away. Medical bills do that to people. They did it in Harlem in 1963. They still do it now. So, on that corner, with his daughter's pills in one hand and 15,000 imaginary dollars in the other, Rosie wasn't choosing between good and evil in the abstract. He was choosing between his own soul and his little girl's next birthday. And that is how a quiet cook with steady hands stepped across the line into murder, long before a single grain of arsenic ever hit the coffee pot. 2 weeks before the first grain of arsenic hit hot metal, Harlem started talking. It started in a pharmacy on Lenox. Rosie walked in asking for something for rats. The pharmacist heard the way he said it. Careful, too careful. He asked a few questions, didn't like the answers, and refused to sell. An hour later, a different supplier across town wasn't as picky. The powder changed hands anyway. But in Harlem, products weren't the only things that moved. Information moved too. By that evening, Dr. Reginald Hayes was climbing the brownstone steps on 127th Street, coat still on, stethoscope in his bag, a look on his face that said, this wasn't a house call, it was a warning. He told Bumpy the story straight. Your cook is asking for poison. He says it's for rodents. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Most men in Bumpy's position would have exploded. Shouting. Threats. A gun on the table just to feel in control. Bumpy didn't do any of that. He listened. He nodded once. Then he walked Hayes to the door, thanked him for his time, and went quiet. For 3 hours, no orders, no outbursts, just a man in a chair, turning pieces of a puzzle over in his mind. The daughter with the bad heart, the Cadillac on 135th, the Italian snakes who thought they were clever enough to reach him through his own kitchen. When he finally moved, it wasn't toward a gun, it was toward the phone. First call, Nat Pettigrew. Find the arsenic. Track the sale. Start in the Bronx. Work your way back. He wanted to know exactly how far the poison had traveled and who had held it. Second call, May, his wife. No business, no details. Just 3 words. I love you. Then a pause, like he was memorizing the sound of her voice. Then he hung up. Men who live by the streets don't waste those calls. That was his full stop, in case things went wrong. Third call, Juno Brown. We got a problem in the kitchen. In another kind of story, that sentence would end with a body on the floor. Here, it ended with a plan. Bumpy didn't want a quick execution. He wanted a lesson. Not just for Rosie. For every set of eyes and ears in Harlem, and for every snake watching from across the river. Juno's job was simple and surgical. Buy 2 percolators that matched Rosie's down to the handle, scuff them, stain them, make them look like they'd been there for years, then wait for a Sunday when Rosie and Lucille were at church. That Sunday, just after dawn, Juno slipped into the brownstone kitchen with a key Ma Johnson had given him years before. He boxed up the old pot. He put 1 twin on the stove, right where Rosie expected it. The second twin went into a back pantry behind sacks of flour and sugar. From that day on, every morning looked the same from Rosie's side of the counter. He filled his percolator. He measured grounds. He added what he thought was just enough arsenic to keep the timeline on schedule. Water boiled, steam curled, poison dripped into a pot no one ever intended Bumpy to drink from. At 5 a.m., long before Rosie came downstairs, Juno was already in the house, using the hidden pot. Real coffee, no poison, same aroma, same ritual, different fate. Rosie was poisoning water, Bumpy was drinking coffee, and Harlem was watching a man fail a test he never knew Bumpy had already graded. If this sounds familiar, it should. Today we call it an intelligence network. Back then, it was barbers, bartenders, doctors, pharmacists, corner boys. Every small detail flowed back to one brain in one brownstone. When Bumpy was satisfied the trap was set, he picked up the phone one more time. He told Ma Johnson to plan a big Sunday lunch at Sylvia's. Invite the policy bankers, the funeral home directors, the preachers, the cops on the take. 80, maybe 85 people, and make sure Rosie's working the floor, he said. I want him standing in the middle, holding the coffee pot. March D. Sept. Me no sans soixante toi. En 15 p.m. Sylvia's restaurant, Harlem. The place smelled like Sunday. Fried chicken in the oil. Collard greens with smoked turkey. Cornbread just out the pan. A trumpet on the radio, fighting with a room full of voices. Every corner of Harlem had somebody in that dining room. A councilman who owed his last election to votes that appeared out of nowhere. The man who buried half the neighborhood on credit. Policy bankers who moved numbers like priests reading scripture. A sax player whose rent was 3 months late and still had a table by the window. Even an inspector whose hands were so used to envelopes they never seemed to stop shining. 80, maybe 85 people. Different jobs. Same gravity. They all orbited one center. Bumpy Johnson sat at the head of the long table. Gray suit, fresh shirt, napkin folded across his lap like this was just another family meal. Rosie stood in the doorway, holding the coffee pot. To anybody else, he looked like part of the furniture. White apron, clean jacket, the man you barely noticed unless the food was late. To Rosie, the apron felt like a noose. He could feel his pulse beating under the collar, right where a rope would sit. Ma Johnson clinked a glass. The room quieted. The way a place does when everybody knows something important is about to be said. She thanked the guests for coming, talked about community, about how Harlem took care of its own even when the city forgot. Then she turned, hand open, offering the floor. Bumpy pushed his chair back, stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He started with gratitude. Thank you to the churchmen, to the business owners, to the musicians who made the nights less cold. Each name landed like a tap on the shoulder. Then he turned to the kitchen door. 8 years, he said, is a long time to trust one man with what you eat, what you drink, what keeps your heart beating. He called Rosie forward. Come on out here. Let them see the man who's been feeding me, feeding us, all this time. Rosie walked into the center of the room with the pot in his hand. Every step sounded loud, even on soft carpet. He could feel 85 pairs of eyes press into the back of his jacket. Bumpy put a palm on his shoulder. Squeezed once, gentle, almost affectionate. This man, he told the room, came to Harlem with nothing but a little girl and a used suitcase. He worked every shift I had. Sun up, sun down. Kept me alive in more ways than one. Laughter in the room. Nods. A few forks tapped politely on plates. The more Bumpy praised him, the paler Rosie got. Because every word was true. That was the worst part. In his head, scenes flickered in and out of focus. Lucille at 9, asleep on the bus seat with her head on his arm. Lucille at 12, sitting in a hospital hallway drawing hearts that didn't look like any heart he'd ever seen in a book. Lucille at 17, a hand pressed to her chest, whispering, "Daddy, it hurts when I walk too fast." Bumpy took the cup in front of him. The same cup Rosie had filled that morning. The same pot. 16 days in a row. Rosie watched his hand close around the handle. "You made it yourself today, right?" Bumpy asked softly. Just for Rosie. Rosie's throat locked. "Yes, Mr. Johnson." Bumpy nodded like that was a comforting thought. He lifted the cup and, instead of drinking, turned to the room. "If a man feeds you for 8 years, you owe him something," he said. "Respect, gratitude, maybe a round of applause." The room responded on cue. Hands came together. Some people whistled. A few called Rosie's name. Rosie didn't hear any of it. All he could hear was his own pulse. All he could see was Lucille's face, flashing behind every pair of eyes staring at him. "Sit down, Rosie," Bumpy said. "Right there." He pulled out a chair in the center, placed the cup in front of Rosie instead. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Conversations died altogether. Rosie's hands started to tremble. The pot in his grip rattled against the side of the cup. Bumpy rested 2 fingers on the handle, steadying it. "No," he said, "not up there, not today. Today, you drink." He didn't shout. He didn't explain. He just slid the cup a little closer. Rosie stared at the surface. Thin line of steam, faint circle of oil. 16 days of poison in one last serving. At least that's what his mind told him. He thought of Lucille on an operating table in Baltimore. He thought of a letter with a hospital seal and a number he could never reach on his own. If he didn't drink, she died. If he did drink, he died. That's what the contract sounded like in his head. His first sip was barely more than a touch of the lips. The room leaned in. You could hear ice clink in a glass at the back of the restaurant, and nothing else. Warm liquid slid down his throat. Nothing happened. No lightning bolt. No chest tearing itself open. Just coffee. Just heat. Just the burn of his own fear. Bumpy smiled. "Just a little. All of it," he said. "We don't waste what the house pays for." Rosie lifted the cup again. His fingers shook so badly he had to use both hands. Another mouthful, then another. Each swallow louder than the last. In his mind, Lucille kept flickering. Her laughing over bad TV. Her coughing at 2 in the morning. Her face the night he took the envelope from Danny and told himself this was the only way. Around him, nobody moved. Forks rested on plates, cigarettes burned down to ash, 85 witnesses held in place by one coffee cup. Bumpy refilled it when it ran low, poured slow, like this was a sermon instead of a sentence. Sip, swallow, sip, swallow, sip, swallow. Rosie waited for dizziness, for the room to tilt, for his heart to grab the inside of his ribs and refuse to let go. Nothing. By the time the pot ran dry, sweat had soaked through his undershirt. His breath came short, his hands shook so violently he had to grip the edge of the table just to keep from sliding to the floor. But he was still breathing. No collapse, no ambulance, no priest, just a man who had walked into Sylvia's as a cook and now sat under the weight of 90 stares, knowing every single person in that room had watched him drink what he believed was his own execution. That was the point. This wasn't just revenge. It was a ritual, a demonstration. Inside those four walls, Bumpy wasn't just punishing one man. He was sending out a message that would travel farther than any bullet. You cannot reach me from the outside. You cannot reach me from the inside. Try, and I'll make sure the whole neighborhood watches you fail. The pot was empty. The room was silent. Rosie was still alive. Only his hands were dead, steady no more. For a long moment, after the pot ran dry, nobody moved. Rosie sat there, soaked in sweat, waiting for his heart to stop, waiting for the darkness to close in. It didn't. No numb fingers. No chest locking up. Just the sound of his own breath, ragged and too loud in the silence. Bumpy watched him like a man watching a storm pass by the window instead of through the house. Then he spoke. That's enough. He took the empty cup from Rosie's hands, set it down with care, like it was made of glass and dynamite. What you've been drinking, he said, isn't arsenic. It's coffee and bitters. The pot in my kitchen got switched 3 weeks ago. You never had a chance to kill me. The words hit harder than any poison. Rosie's body folded in on itself. The tension that had kept him upright snapped. He grabbed the back of the chair like a man holding onto a railing in rough water and started to sob, not polite tears, not quiet sniffles. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere below the ribcage, dragged up through 8 years of loyalty and 16 days of slow betrayal. He talked because there was nothing else left. He told them about Lucille, about the murmur in her chest when she was 9, about the way she held the banister when she climbed stairs at 17, about Johns Hopkins and the letter with the numbers on it. 12,000 for the surgery, 3,000 for recovery, 15 total, 2 he had saved. He told them about the Cadillac by the pharmacy, about a man named Danny who knew more about his daughter's medical file than her own father ever had, and about the envelope that felt heavier than cash should. He didn't try to make himself look good. There was no way to do that now. I was going to take the money, he said. I took the money. I was going to kill you. For my kid. The room listened. Some eyes were hard. Some were wet. Most of them saw a version of themselves they hoped they'd never have to meet. Bumpy let the confession hang there. Then he stepped closer. I knew about Lucille's heart the day you walked into my kitchen, he said. That was the part Rosie had never imagined. I knew, Bumpy repeated. The clinics you'd tried, the bills you couldn't pay. I knew you were a man with one skill and one sick child. He watched Rosie's face as the meaning landed. In 8 years, he asked, did it ever once cross your mind to just ask me for help? That was the knife. Because the answer was obvious. No. And under that no was something uglier. The belief that the man who trusted him with his food, his house, his family, would never trust him enough to save his daughter without a price. Here's the thing about men like Rosie. They don't wake up one day wanting to put poison in a coffee pot. They get walked there, one hospital visit at a time, one bill at a time, one night of hearing their child gasp in the next room and knowing the clock is ticking. Desperation and a deadline will do what greed alone can't. They bend a man's idea of himself until he can't recognize who picked up the pen to sign the deal. Bumpy could have ended it right there. A nod, a gesture, and Rosie would have been dragged out the back door of Sylvia's. No body for Lucille. maybe no explanation. Just a disappearance people in Harlem had seen 100 times. Instead, Bumpy chose something else. "You're done in Harlem," he said. "After today, you don't set foot north of 96th Street. Not for a visit, not for a funeral, not for nothing." Rosie's shoulders shook. He nodded, because what else was there to do? Bumpy kept going. "This week," he said, "Lucille's surgery gets paid. 12,000 for the knife, 3 for the bed and the breathing after. She lives, she grows up. She never knows my name had anything to do with it." He wasn't offering mercy. He was writing a sentence. "You don't die today, Roosevelt. You wake up. Every day. Somewhere far from here. You watch your daughter walk, run, laugh, have kids of her own. And every birthday, every Christmas, every quiet morning with a cup of coffee in your hand, you remember exactly what you were willing to do to buy that time. That was the punishment, not a bullet, not a beating in an alley. A life with no Harlem, no brownstone kitchen, no seat at Sylvia's. Just a man and his memories, replaying 16 days every time he reached for a coffee pot. For the people in that room, the lesson was double-edged. On one side, they saw the reach of Bumpy Johnson, a man who could have an entire neighborhood watch a betrayal crumble and still choose who walked out alive. On the other side, they saw the cost. A king who paid hospital bills with one hand and flooded the same streets with blood and vice with the other. Hero of Harlem or its biggest problem. The truth sat somewhere in between. He didn't wear a halo. He didn't fit in a case file. He lived in the gray space where power, fear, loyalty, and need all drink from the same pot. Rosie would leave Harlem with his life. Lucille would leave the operating room with a steady heart. And Bumpy Johnson would leave Sylvia's having proved one more time that in his world, the heaviest sentence wasn't death. It was having to live with what you almost became. Rosie left Harlem the way a man leaves a burning house. No suitcase full of cash, no farewell tour, just a coat, a worn pair of shoes, and an appointment letter from Johns Hopkins folded like a passport to another life. Lucille went under the knife. 12,000 for the surgeons, 3,000 for the bed, the machines, the weeks of watching monitors instead of her father's eyes. She came out alive. The murmur in her chest became a story instead of a sentence. She lived to 63, married a schoolteacher in Philadelphia. Quiet man, steady job, the kind of life Roosevelt Clement never believed he was allowed to hope for his daughter. She never knew who paid. That was part of the design. Rosie ended up in Detroit, not at the head of a policy bank, not in some back room counting dirty money. In a little diner off a regular street. Eggs, bacon, bottomless coffee. He kept the place clean. The prices fair. On slow afternoons, he would wipe down the counter and stare at the coffee pot a little too long. Same shape, same chrome shine, different city. Different man. The taste was ordinary. The aftertaste was not. Some favors don't feel like blessings. They feel like debts you can never finish paying. Every refill was a reminder, you're only standing here because someone you tried to kill decided you should live. Back in Harlem, one last message crossed the river to Brooklyn. A scrap of paper delivered to Carmine Persico. 4 simple words. Send better snakes. That's how men like Bumpy closed a chapter. Not with a press conference, with a note that said, "I saw your hand. I beat it. Try harder next time." Now, there's something you need to understand about stories like this. Half of what we've walked through tonight, lives in ink. Names, dates, charge sheets, death certificates, Bumpy Johnson, Harlem, mob wars, a man collapsing in a restaurant, cause of death listed as heart attack. The other half lives in whispers, in kitchens after midnight, in booths at Sylvia's, in that gap between what cops can prove and what the neighborhood swears it saw. History gives you skeletons. Street legend gives you flesh. Neither one is complete on its own. So this channel doesn't pretend to replay every second like a security camera. That's not possible. Instead, We rebuild the feeling, the choices, the price. We take the records we have, the legends that survived, and ask one question: if it happened like this, what does it say about the people inside the story? Which brings us back to coffee. Because years after Sylvia's, Bumpy Johnson's real-life story ended in another restaurant. Ordinary place, ordinary day. He stood up, clutched his chest, and dropped. The paperwork says myocardial infarction, heart attack. Case closed. The rumors never quite agreed. Some people look at a man who ran Harlem for decades, survived prison, plots, and bullets, and they don't buy just a heart giving out over a plate of food. They see patterns. They see enemies with long memories. They see another part that nobody had time to test. Was it simply a 5-8-year-old heart finally cashing in every stress, every cigarette, every night spent waiting for a knock on the door? Or was it something else? Another cup, another lesson. That's the gray zone where Bumpy Johnson lives forever, halfway between court transcripts and corner gossip, between the file and the fable. Look, if this story hit different, you already know what to do. But before you scroll, I want you to drop 3 things in the comments. First, if you were Rosie, standing in that kitchen with a sick daughter and a $15,000 bill, what do you honestly think you would have done? Second, after everything you've heard, is Bumpy Johnson a hero, a villain, or just a product of his time and his streets? And third, do you want to go deeper into that last day in the restaurant, the real final cup of coffee in Bumpy Johnson's life, in the next video?